Hello to everybody. I see people are just starting to join. My roster is quickly populating. So I'm Nancy Guerra. I'm Dean of the School of Social Ecology, and we're going to wait a bit, probably till about 1:05, to let everybody get on Zoom. And then I will be introducing Dr. Borelli and telling you a little bit about our program. So we're quickly populating. I know we actually hit our maximum on this on the Zoom 100, so we've redone it, so now we can get up to 500, because I did hear that some people were not being allowed to enter, and we can't have that happen. So as we populate over the next few minutes, get comfortable, get your drinks, your coffee, whatever it is that you would like, and we're gonna have a fantastic presentation and Q&A. Jessie, do you want to say hi?
Hi, everyone. Hope you guys are all doing fairly well today on this beautiful day of quarantine.
Yes, and you're not zoomed out. This is my new word. I'm zoomed out. I think it's become a multi-purpose word to do. But one of the quirky things, which is interesting, I don't know, just to share while we're waiting for people to log on, is that we're psychologists, so we're not used to seeing people's faces so close up. It's like Zoom violates our personal space in a way. You know, you're seeing people like smack in the face as if we were standing 3 inches from them, and personal space is about 18 inches. So it's and particularly when you have a panel of 9 or 12 staring at you. The other thing, I don't know if some of you agree, I know for me, it's hard not to fix my hair. It's like, oh, like that doesn't look right. It's because you see yourself. You're not used to talking to people and looking at yourself. So that's a very awkward situation as well. So I guess we're all getting used to the new reality.
I've learned my strategy is to make my picture go away, my picture of myself, because otherwise I spend too much time looking at my picture of myself. So I've made my picture of myself go away so that I don't, because I just don't like looking at myself. So I'll make my picture of myself go away, and then I can focus on things better.
But then can other people see you though?
Oh, yeah. Other people see
me. I didn't know you could do that. That's
you can do that. I figured that out pretty quickly, and then I could just focus on other people, just like you would in a normal social interaction. You don't see that yourself. You're focusing on other people, right? And I prefer that.
Yes, no, I agree. The other funny thing for all of you attending who are using Zoom quite a bit is when you have a group of, let's just say 5 or so, and you're not using the raise hand function and nobody's hosting, it's so hard to know who talks next. And everybody starts talking, then nobody talks. There's so many quirky things that you don't realize in a regular conversation in person. There are all these subtle cues as to when you can start talking and when someone's about to stop. All the body language is really there too. So anyway, I see we're populating pretty quickly. We'll wait just another 2 minutes to allow everybody a chance to get on. The other problem with Zoom I have is that sometimes the Zoom call goes too long, and so you don't just end right at 12:59, or you may have to get up to get something, and so we don't leave time between meetings, and you just one back to back. When you're scheduling in person, you usually leave time to get from one place to the next. So we're getting pretty full. We'll wait 1 more minute, and then we'll officially start. So I hope you're all having a wonderful day. For all of you in Southern California, it's absolutely beautiful out today. First, when the quarantine started, it was too cold, then it was too hot, and now it's just right. So I feel like Goldilocks and the 3 bears, and we finally got it just right. So, okay, I see on my clock it's 1:05, so we have a great number of participants. Why don't we get started? So again, I'm Nancy Guerra. I'm Dean of the School of Social Ecology at UC Irvine, and I am super happy to welcome you to our Parkside chat on pandemic parenting with Dr. Jessica Borelli. We have sent you in advance a brief video that Jessie and I filmed in an actual park. We thought we'd change it up a bit. Instead of putting on a park background on Zoom, we actually went to the park at UCI. And I hope you've had a chance to watch it. If you haven't, it's in the chat. There's a link to it in the chat. Feel free to share it with your friends. We're also going to be recording the webinar today. So for people who haven't had a chance to see it and want to watch it, we will follow up and send you a link. But we're going to begin either as a recap if you've watched the video, or for those of you who haven't seen the video, with Dr. Borelli giving kind of a brief recap of what she talked about. And I asked her to summarize what are the, 4 to 5 key messages that you think are really important for parents to have during this time. And Jessie and I are both psychologists and mothers, and Jessie's a clinical psychologist. I'm a developmental psychologist. So hopefully we can share our expertise with you after her brief recap in a Q&A, and please use the Q&A function after. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Borelli, and she can start us off with a brief recap.
Thanks so much, Nancy. So hopefully this won't be so terribly redundant with what was in the video. So I think, to summarize a little bit and to say something hopefully that's a little bit new as well, this is really a time that's like nothing else that any of us have ever experienced before. Though in some ways it is kind of like what a lot of parents experience, except that taken to the nth level, in that parenting is kind of like trying to do everything that we're all doing all the time, except on steroids, in that you're trying to do it all at the same time. And we're all trying to do all of that within the home environment. So there's very little escape from anything that's going on. Like, we're doing it all right here and we can't escape each other. So I think when trying to think about what are tips to kind of stay sane during this time and be as effective as you can be, I think these are the kinds of things that we came up with. So first, I think a primary goal should be really trying to protect your relationships during this time, because I think if we don't have our relationships, we don't have very much to build off of. And I think that means all relationships. So not just your relationships with your kids, but also if you have a co-parent or a partner, the relationships with your partners as well. And making time for those relationships, making time to connect with each person in your family individually, as well as together in a group, is really, really important. Your kids probably need you a lot more now than they have at other times in their lives, and so does your partner. And so even though that might feel like it's taking away from other things that are really valuable, that might be the most important thing you do every day, is spending, even if it's just 10 minutes individually with those people in your lives, that might be the most important time you can spend each day. I also think that something that can be really, really important in this time, and I said this in the webinar as well, but I'm going to say it again here, is thinking about kind of stepping back, taking a minute to step back and think, what are the most important goals or values that I have for this time of life? And how can I kind of orient my parenting to focus on those goals or values? So you might say, for example, my number one goal, or my 3 most important goals or values for this time of life are to really prioritize my children's health and my children's psychological safety and maybe their learning, for example. Or my goals for this time of life are to boost my children's psychological resilience. Or I really want my kids to work really hard and to put in lots of effort. And I don't know, I'm making things up here because I think that this will be different for every single family. But I think that that kind of exercise of stepping back and just reflecting on what you're trying to accomplish and what really, really matters can be really helpful in terms of helping to guide every little decision, because otherwise it can be really overwhelming to think about every single parenting decision that you make every day in isolation. But if you have this broader framework that you can draw upon, then it just helps to make those decisions not seem individual. And then I think it also helps you do the other things that I'm going to recommend, which involve letting go of a lot of other things that you might not care about as much. So the third tip that I was going to give is to not be perfectionistic about everything. So if I were to show you my bedroom that I'm sitting in right now, you would believe me that I'm not a perfectionist, because my bedroom is a total mess. And in fact, most of my house is a total mess. And that's what I would advocate to you, is to identify certain areas of your life. And it might not be messiness. For me, it's messiness. Certain areas of your life that you can say, I'm okay letting go of this area right now. I'm okay not being perfectionistic about this. I'm okay kind of choosing to say, this is not going to be my priority right now, because I can only prioritize a few areas in which I can obtain mastery, right? And so right now I can prioritize this and this and this, and I cannot prioritize everything, because prioritizing everything is impossible. And this is a time of life where we've taken on a lot more than we ordinarily take on. And so there have to be other areas that give. Alongside that, this is something that Nancy brought up, Dean Guerra brought up when we were talking, is that you have to be able to practice self-compassion. So this involves being able to let go and forgive yourself and say, it's okay that I'm not able to excel in every domain of my life. It's okay that I'm not able to keep my bedroom looking clean. It's okay that I didn't make my bed this morning. It's okay that I'm not excelling in all of these different areas. This is a really, really hard thing for people to do. And it's a really hard thing if you're used to performing at a very high level. And I think that we have to extend this benefit to our children as well. So not just for ourselves, we have to be able to say to our kids, it's okay if you're not excelling in all of your assignments that you're being given. It's okay if you're not completing all of the assignments you're being given in school. It's okay if you're not, etc. You can choose what you're going to be working hardest at, because this is a time when we're making choices in the way we're expending our efforts. I think making those choices can be facilitated by identifying what your values are. The fourth thing that I think could be really helpful is when you're having a hard time, when you're stressed out, acknowledge it openly to the people around you, including your kids. For the longest time, psychologists gave parents the message to hide how they were feeling to their kids, that there was somehow something really bad about telling people, including their kids, openly that they were struggling. But now we tell parents the opposite thing, that it's actually much worse for kids to be able to detect parents' stress and not have an explanation for it. That's far more frightening for children. And right now, parents have a lot of reasons to be stressed out. So it's much better if you are able to identify, wow, I'm feeling really stressed right now, or I'm really worried, or I'm really down. Your kid will probably be able to pick up on that too. And it'd be much better for you to say to your child, I'm having a really hard day right now, or this is really stressful for me. And for you to own it, and for you to give your child the words and the framing about why that might be in kind of a kid sanitized version of that. So maybe I'm having a hard day because things were stressful for me in work, or I'm frustrated that I couldn't get the groceries I wanted to get at the store. So kind of give them an explanation that might work for them, kind of so that they don't make up their own explanation, right? Because they might make up something that's far scarier or far worse. That's a much, much better option than them creating an explanation in their head. It helps them understand what's going on with you. It makes their world a lot more understandable, and it models open disclosure of emotion, which is a very good skill for them to have. The fifth tip I think is really important is to focus on what you can be grateful for during this time, which hopefully is a lot. So you can be grateful for, hopefully, having a safe home to reside in. You can be grateful for having close family ties if you have them. You can be grateful for having time to spend with family members. Hopefully there are more things that you can be grateful for, but there's lots and lots of research that shows that just spending the time thinking about, reflecting on, and feeling the feelings associated with gratitude actually creates psychological wellness. So those are kind of just some small tips. The other thing that Dean Guerra asked me to talk about a little bit here is that the challenges are very, very different for parents parenting different age children. And that's just something that's really important to recognize, is that it's almost like parents who have infants and parents who have toddlers and preschoolers and school-age kids and high schoolers, we're all living in different homes. And I really realize that when I talk to parents who have kids of different ages. I have elementary school age kids, but when I talk to parents of high schoolers, I'm like, wow, I wish I had high schoolers. Not really, but we have different types of challenges. And so I just wanted to say a few words about the different types of challenges that parents are facing and the different types of benefits that parents have with having kids at different ages. So parents of infants and preschoolers and toddlers, so little kids, some of the things that come up for them when they're at home right now are kind of filling their time. Parents are primarily responsible. They're the primary caretakers for kids. And so like usually every waking moment of a little child's life, the parent is kind of in charge of that time. So they have a lot of responsibility for keeping kids busy, keeping them engaged. Very challenging for those parents to get any work done. The parent is typically the child's whole world. So in many ways, kids who are very young might be totally unaware of what's happening in the outside world. They might not know that there's a pandemic, or they might know there's a pandemic, but have a pretty limited sense of what that means. And that's advantageous in the sense that they might not be worried about it, or they might have some kind of limited sense of what's happening. But there are challenges for those parents because they're still very much, very, very involved in caregiving and might have a lot of hard time getting other things done in the house. So their time might be very limited. But those kids are probably not as much as older kids feeling a lot of loss, for example. So they're probably less prone to things like depression. School-age kids bring other types of challenges. I think one of the biggest challenges is that they need to be taught. Younger school-age kids, so kindergarten, first grade, second grade, require a lot of hand-holding with teaching. The demands for remote distance learning are very, very high for that age. They get in a lot of arguments if there are siblings, and so parents have to break up arguments between them. They have a lot of trouble mastering their course material. They're much more prone to anxiety and depression, also attention-related problems, so parents have to be heavily involved there. And a lot of parents that I've been talking to and kids, clients I work with, they complain a lot about boredom. It's actually one of the most common complaints I've been hearing is related to boredom. So keeping them engaged in activities seems to be a lot of what parents get tasked with and what can be hard, especially now when there's so limited, the range of possibilities is quite limited. But those kids still, they're more reliant on their parents compared to like high schoolers. They're missing their friends a lot more and missing their social relationships. They're kind of in between younger kids and older kids in terms of how much they rely on their friendships and are caring about and missing their friendships and things like that. High schoolers, parents of high schoolers are often talking about having a hard time getting their high schoolers out of their bedrooms, having a hard time getting high schoolers off of technology, getting high schoolers engaged in the family. So many parents of high schoolers complain that they don't know anything that's going on in their high schoolers' lives, or they feel very disconnected from high schoolers. Again, there are lots of differences between high schoolers. So this is a generalization. Trying to find out what's going on, trying to engage the high schooler in conversation. Again, boredom is another issue. And the parents of high schoolers tend to be much less involved in their education, although it can be a challenge if the high schoolers not keeping up with schoolwork. Parents might not know for quite a while because they're less involved in their education. So I think I'll stop there because I've talked for quite a while, just as a summary of some of the challenges that might come up.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jessie. That was
Yeah.
really informative. I want to ask you a question and just mention something before we turn to the Q&A. As I see, we're populating the Q&A, and I encourage all of our attendees to please address some questions to Jessie so she can answer your specific issue. I thought maybe you could share, since you're a parent of 3 young children, what your parenting goals are as a mother.
Yeah, sure. So I definitely did think about that when I posed that. I think I feel like my first, and I have ordered these because I think that in some ways you have to kind of put them in order in terms of a hierarchy. I think that right now my first priority parenting goal is kind of keeping my kids physically safe from the virus. So that's definitely my first priority. And so I kind of prioritize that in terms of, keeping my kids out of harm's way, not letting them leave the house too much, socially distancing and things like that. As Dean Guerra mentioned in the video that we did, my husband is a police officer, and so we have a little bit higher exposure than most families do. And so I'm maybe a little bit more worried than most families, so we're trying to kind of keep them a little bit more sheltered. So that would be number one. Number two is that I want to make sure that they're feeling psychologically safe as well. I think that the disruption in schedule has probably been, like, when they left school, that really was a signal for them that something was really wrong. I remember they were aware of the virus, but they weren't aware of how scary it was until the day that schools got shut down. That day, my kids came home and they were all like, this is really serious. This is really bad. And then 2 friends from their school got sick. And they found out about that a couple days later because their babysitter babysat for those kids too. And then that really scared them. And they know that their dad's a police officer. And so they're worried about that. And so, just being aware that my kids, that worries are on their minds, has made me more attentive to their mental health and their emotional well-being. And so I've been pretty focused on wanting to have lots of conversations with them about how they're feeling and how they're doing. And then also, they're missing out on a lot of things. A play that they were in got canceled, and that was a big loss. And so just like taking a lot more time to focus on how they're doing. So that would be like number 2. And I think I'm less worried about their education. Hope that's okay to say that. But I think that's important, but I'm less worried about that. So that's for me. I don't want to say that should be for everyone, but that's for me.
No, I thought it's good for you to share, and I'm sure everybody has their own individual goals. The other thing I just wanted to mention before we go to the Q&A, and I see we're getting more questions, is throughout the conversation and when we recorded our Parkside chat, I think one of the themes that comes through is this whole issue of ambiguity versus certainty, because you mentioned set goals and prioritize. And I've seen also that the biggest challenge for people is just dealing with ambiguity. When people ask me, when is school going to start up again? What's the plan for fall quarter? And I say, I don't know yet. That's very disconcerting for people. And imagine for children, and particularly I think as a developmental psychologist, the elementary school age, who see the world as black and white and are very concrete. They want to know exactly what's happening, what's not happening. They don't think in this abstract, well, we have to wait and see, and this and that. So I think, kind of aligned with what you mentioned, this idea of having certain routines and keeping routines. I find just even for myself, I try to keep certain routines that I've done before because it makes life feel normal again. And people really desperately want life to feel normal. And imagine kids. Kids are used to normalcy, routine, and games with rules. We don't change rules midway in games, or kids will call you to task on that, particularly younger ones. So I think part of the advice that you're giving is really to find a way to try to create normalcy as much as you can, and stick to certain routines and have goals and follow them. I don't know, did you want to add to that? And if not, I'll turn to the questions.
Yeah, no, I think that's so true. I was just thinking about one of my kids who is waiting for an Amazon package that won't be delivered for 2 weeks, yet he checks like 7 times a day for that Amazon package to come. And I'm just thinking about how not knowing when something's going to happen, even though we've kind of been told when it will happen. You're absolutely right. I think that not knowing is really, really hard. And yet also, I would say that not knowing, getting practiced at not knowing something is a good skill too. So, from an anxiety perspective, right? I think that from an anxiety perspective, I would say, from an anxiety prevention perspective, I would say that it's also a good skill to get some practice at working within ambiguity and getting tolerant of ambiguity, and that kind of getting comfortable with this idea that it's okay to not know, and that it's okay to be comfortable living with not knowing too.
No, I agree. I always liken it to being stuck on the tarmac in a plane. I think it's the best analogy, where if the pilot comes on and says, we're stuck out here and I have no clue when we're going to take off, everybody would be just upset and mad and sad and who knows what. It's better, even if the pilot doesn't know, it's reassuring to say, they're coming out to check on something. They told us about a half an hour and they'll be here. And then even if they're not there in a half an hour, you get back on and you say, okay, it's going to be another half an hour. And so I think for kids, you can really take that to the kids, a child's worldview, where a day is a huge amount of time. For us, a year is not that long, but for a child, like, it's huge. And so they have a different sense of time. So I think we can be guides for, yes, you have to learn how to deal with ambiguity and not knowing, but we can also say that, in 3 times that you sleep at night, you'll wake up and your package will be here. So you have to go to sleep 3 times, making it even more concrete for younger kids, and even in 3 days or soon, that doesn't tell them. So these are all great pieces of advice, Jesse. Let me turn to some of the Q&A.
Okay.
I see we have a lot of questions. Let's see. Open questions. I have a son that is prone to anxiety. This situation is making it much worse. Any tips on dealing with children that already suffer from anxiety?
Well, that's one of my favorite topics.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would love to ask if that parent, if I can, actually, what the anxiety is about. I don't know if that's allowed for me to ask a follow-up question, but because I actually, in my practice, I specialize in working with kids with anxiety, and I've seen kind of 2 bifurcating patterns with the kids that I work with anxiety. And one pattern is kids getting more anxious when they're at home, and one is kids getting a lot less anxious when they're at home. And I think that that's because about half of the kids who are anxious, all of their stressors have been removed from being at home. And that's because their stressors exist in the outside world. So for instance, a lot of kids whose stress comes from going to school or seeing other people, like social anxiety related stressors or school related anxiety, they're not dealing with those stressors anymore. They're actually at home and they're relatively protected from those stressors. But I'm actually quite worried about what's going to happen when the world opens up again and they go back to school. I think it's going to be way worse since they've been avoiding those stressors because of all this distancing that we've been asked to do. But then there's this other segment of the population where anxiety has been a lot worse. Kids who are worried about infection, for instance, or kids whose routines have been disrupted, and that's creating a lot of anxiety. Did she answer, Nancy?
What's that?
Did the person answer the question?
No. Someone just also said the idea of part of anxiety is not knowing about the future, and you can't see friends. Maybe you can incorporate that into your answer.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that anyway, I think that there's a lot of reasons to be anxious, but I was a little bit stalling until the person answered. So I think, I mean, the kind of general answer, without knowing the exact thing that your kid is anxious about, the kind of general answer that I would give would be to try to identify what your child's anxious about, and then to try to work towards finding ways of progressively challenging that anxiety. So I'll give you an example without kind of knowing what your kid's anxious about, and then hopefully this will be somewhat relevant. So if your child were anxious about, I'm going to take the example that Nancy gave actually a minute ago. If your child had a hard time losing at games, which is something that is not an uncommon thing that kids have problems with, or with ambiguous endings of games, or with things being cut short, and that's something that we see quite frequently, you might want to work on that issue with them. And so you might want to develop kind of a plan. And a lot of kids, this comes out a lot of times in sibling conflict, where kids won't be able to lose at games or have trouble if games get interrupted because it's unpredictable or because they don't have control over that. So you might want to say, kind of work with them on this issue and say, okay, so we're going to actually work on this. The next time we play this game, you're not going to win. And we're going to work on you managing your reaction of not winning. And we're going to set this up so that you get practice on not winning. Or you might want to say something like, so I want you to try to imagine what it might be like to not win. And let's go through and talk about what might it not be like to win. And let's talk about all the feelings you would have. Let's imagine what it would look like. Let's imagine what you would say. Let's imagine what you would feel like, that kind of thing. And you would work with them kind of progressively to get closer and closer to what it would be like to not win, if that makes sense. So I guess essentially what I'm saying is you want to try to work them closer and closer towards the situations that they're frightened of.
And can I sort of add to that or ask a
Yeah.
further question, because I've commented, and I commented in the video as well. You know, my generation of parents were a little different than I think the current generation. And this idea that your child should never suffer, never experience
Yeah.
any negative emotions, never experience any negative events, kind of what you're saying is, well, it doesn't prepare them for how to cope with them. And
Right.
so they need a strategy. If they've never had to cope with rejection, they won't know how to do it when it
Right.
happens. And so in a way that creates anxiety. I've never had to, you know, I've never experienced. That's always one of, I mean, I remember when my kids were younger, one of the ironies of being a parent is that you want only the best for your child, but you know they have to experience the worst too. And
Mm-hmm.
it's so hard to see them suffer. And I tend to be a problem solver. I always, and a fixer. I want to intervene and fix it. But if I fix everything for them, they'll never learn to fix it
Mm-hmm.
themselves. And so you're really saying things that cause anxiety are often things that we don't have skills to cope with, and we
Mm-hmm.
don't feel confident that we can cope with them.
Mm-hmm.
So to the extent we can give kids those skills, it
Mm-hmm.
reduces their anxiety, which
Mm-hmm.
is very, very true.
Absolutely.
Another question that we had, we had related to this was, and I'm curious about this because now I have little grandchildren, is the, you know, the little ones. I don't know how many of our participants have preschool, toddlers, or, well, babies don't know what's going on whatsoever, but 2 and up. I don't know how they really understand this. They know there's a virus. When my granddaughter said, "Grandma, I want to come see you when the coronavirus is over," you know, and she's like, "What does she think the coronavirus?" She has that in her vocabulary. She's 3.
Uh-huh.
The
Yeah.
coronavirus.
Yeah.
I can't come see you because of the coronavirus. But how does she understand that? Or how would I explain that to her? She thinks the world just changed and now everything
Mhm.
is the coronavirus. So what would you recommend for parents of younger children,
In terms of how they can talk to
toddlers?
their kids
Yeah,
about,
how do they
yeah.
talk to them about it? What should they tell them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of giving kids some kind of explanation is important because they definitely understand that something has changed. Like they understand they're not going out, and they understand they're not going to their parks. They understand they're not going to school, preschool if they were in preschool. So giving them some kind of sense of there's something that's happening in the environment, right? Not in those words, but you want to try to, I think, convey that you're in control and that doctors are in control and that there's a plan in place, right? So I think using the technical words like coronavirus, or there's like a flu-like thing, like the virus, like the flu, and that we need to stay home right now until it's safe outside. It's safe here, and we're protected here, but we need to stay inside until it's safe out there. And probably the most important thing about what you say is how you feel when you're saying it. I would say it's probably far less important the actual words that you're saying, and much more your anxiety level when you're talking about it. So I think as parents, when we're talking, we're conveying not only the words that we're saying, but also the emotion we have when we're saying it. And kids are very much watching that. So I think that if you have any concerns about how you say it, you could practice saying it, to a friend or to your partner before you say it, just to make sure you feel comfortable saying it, because kids are watching for those things too.
Right. And we've heard from one of our participants, Jacqueline Christensen, says her 3-year-old understands that people are sick, so we have to stay home or wear masks and wash our hands. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that's, maybe making it really simple and not making it a bigger sort of whole thing about pandemic, but just people are sick. So we have another question from an attendee who asked that, what are some tips for toddlers, the 2 to 3-year-old group, who are expressing sadness about socializing with other kids and going to play areas such as beaches and parks? I have explained we will be able to soon, but we cannot at the moment. I have not explained anything other than there's germs. How can I comfort, or should I redirect? So how do you comfort kids who want to go play and they want to go outside? What do you tell them other than germs? That doesn't mean much for a 3-year-old.
I know, it's so sad. I feel so bad for them too. I mean, it doesn't really compute, and it's like this trade-off, which is I feel like a common trade-off in parenting, because it feels so insufficient to say germs, right? Because it doesn't seem like a sufficient thing to say to your child who's like, but I have this very basic need, and it is a very basic need. And I think as parents, we also have that really basic need to connect with people, and we are also being deprived of that very basic need. And yet, if we actually told the kids what's really happening, that would scare them, right? So we can't really do that. And so I think at least my instinct would be to say, to try to really empathize deeply on an emotional level with your child, and to just really go there and to say, like, I am so sorry. It is, and hopefully you can really connect with your child on an emotional level about this, because there is a lot of pain and a lot of loss around this. I mean, everybody has lost out in a very major way around these issues. We've all missed a lot of life events, a lot of moments of social connection, and we're all hurting a lot, including your kids. And it makes me really sad to think that even little 2 and 3-year-olds are feeling that. So maybe you can focus on connecting deeply emotionally with your child rather than talking about the germs. Because I do think that or deepening the conversation about the germs and the facts about the pandemic, because I think that would only contribute to fears.
So you want to keep your kids you want to reduce their fear and anxiety while still comforting them, and maybe taking them out to the park to run around by themselves, so they can at least be outside, which is nice that we're starting to reopen some public spaces. Well, here's a related question, which brings up another issue of screen time in general, but particularly screen time on video chats. And so one of our attendees says that she has a 6-month-old son who would have otherwise been spending time with relatives and connecting. And we know that's really when the early attachment bonds form. And Jesse is an attachment researcher, and now he only spends time with 3 people. How do we ensure that he doesn't miss out on getting to know people? And this attendee says that they're keeping their son away from screens, and so they don't allow him to see people on video calls. And so that's an interesting issue, because we all know the American Academy recommended no screen time, but could we make an exception? And maybe 6 months is a little young, but is it okay to allow some screen time to see other faces? Will that confuse children? Will that create a problem? What's your advice on that?
I mean, the tough thing is we don't have research to guide us in that way. I mean, so we're operating a little bit blindly there. But I mean, I would try to think, if it were me, I would try to think a little bit creatively, because, within the confines of thinking about the pandemic, but I might think about audio actually instead of video. I might think about, could your child be exposed to sounds like voices of the people, because audio is a very, like hearing the voice of the people that you want the child to become attached to is a very important stimulus as well, or even smells. So if you felt comfortable with this, having, and the people that you want your child to become attached to, like having those people mail t-shirts, for example, and putting those t-shirts under your child's pillow, in their bed or under their sheets or something like that, just so they get used to the smells of the person, or having them sing songs and then having those played electronically, or tell stories, read them storybooks and then play those. I would try to think, how creatively can you think about getting them exposed to other aspects of them besides video?
That's really good advice. I started thinking maybe you could have them send a recent picture, and if you didn't want them to see video, then you could do just a phone call on speakerphone and have them talk to the person. And then if they sent a t-shirt or something, you could say, look, this is Uncle so-and-so's t-shirt, and now we're talking to Uncle so-and-so. So that's really good advice. I, as a developmental psychologist, I'm not as fussy about screen time. I think that people took that too literally, so they would not let their child's eyes see a screen. I think the gist of it is you don't want to plop your 1-year-old in front of a TV for 12 hours.
Right.
But I don't know. My kids, I used to say, hey, TV's for the parents, not the kids. You need a little downtime. And my kids did just fine. So I'm not really panicky or paranoid about a child seeing a screen. And, for a 6-month-old, maybe it's 2 minutes. Look, there's your aunt or your grandma. and you saw her and here's her picture. Now we're going to hear the video. So, but do you think from your research on attachment that it's very important for parents to maintain these relationships with other family members and close friends for their children?
I think that, I think that the more exposure you can get to more people early on, the better. And it's not that I think that it's not important, that you can't form relationships beyond infancy. I think that you can. But I think that early exposure is really powerful for kids, and
Yeah.
they're building memory networks. And I think from a sensory perspective, I think that the more senses you can give them information, from all of these relationships, the better, right? And we do know that, for example, there are olfactory memories and auditory memories and visual memories. And so I think that, the Zoom interactions are lacking, even if we're just talking about, she was asking about screen time, but Zoom interactions are not in-person interactions. And so I would be, if we're talking about infancy, I do feel sad for that 6-month-old infant and for the relatives of those 6-month-old, the attachment figures of those 6-month-old infants who are missing out on being able to hold those beautiful babies, and for the babies who are missing out on things. And I think it'd be nice to supplement with other types of sensory cues. That would be my thought.
Right, but it won't irreparably damage
No,
them.
it won't irreparably damage. Yeah.
And they're not
Yeah.
sitting in a crib by themselves. They have the caregiver there with them.
Right.
Well, let me just kind of wrap up the screen time because we have a couple of other questions and then move on to some others because we're getting quite a few. A question from one of our viewers is it better for kids to learn about the outside world, zoos, etc., via screen time, or to limit screen time and let them miss out on those things?
Oh gosh. Yeah, I think, I agree with you about the screen time thing. And I think that this is one of those areas where the recommendations, I think, it's tough because I think people have been clear about recommendations, but then now we're in a different situation. And for me, this is a situation where I feel like, I think having these parenting values really helps because I think that it allows you to say what's more important in this situation, right? Is it more important to have contact with attachment figures, right? Or to exposure to zoos or whatever it is? Or is it more important to limit screen time? And I would think about this less as a developmental psychology issue or a pediatric issue and more about it as a parenting choice issue. Because I agree with you, Nancy. I don't think there's, irreparable damage either way from screens. I wouldn't be worried about it from that perspective. So I would think more, do you want this for your child or not? And the other thing I would think about is that it's okay during this time of life to make some rules for now that don't apply later. Developmental psychologists, clinical psychologists, we always say, be consistent in your parenting. And I think that's important to be consistent, but this is not a time like any other time. And it's okay to change your rules. It's okay to change your parenting when everything else in life is changing. So if you want to have a rule for your kids right now that they're allowed to have screens right now, they're allowed to have more screens, or they're allowed to have iPads in bed, or whatever rule it is that you're talking about, that you're going to change as soon as life goes back to normal, that's okay. And I think you as a parent can make those decisions.
That's really good advice. Now we have a couple of questions about academics and catch up and how, what will be the outcome and the consequence of this new way of doing schooling. And one of our viewers asked, I have a new baby and a 4th grader and a full-time job working from home. Wow. Academics honestly have been on the back burner during this time, and I have not been able to supplement any education for my 4th grader beyond the simple PowerPoints and videos provided by the school.
Yeah.
Moving on to 5th grade and future grades developmentally, do you think at this age she would be able to catch up?
I think they're going to have to help her catch up. I don't know how they're going to do it. I don't think that's really on you. I don't think the schools are going to have a choice but to manage that, because you can't be the only parent who's in this situation, right? I'm another parent who's in this situation, right? I have a full-time job. My husband is a first responder. I have 3 children at home. There are so many parents who are in tough situations. There are single parents who are in tough situations. We were not meant to be home educators, right? And the schools know that. So I think there's going to have to be a lot of accommodation that is going to have to happen because it has to happen. That's my answer to you. I'm not an educator. I mean, I'm not a primary school educator, but I feel like they have to be accommodating of those things.
And I think it's important also to realize that children are very resilient and they bounce back really fast. I mean, if you can lose half your brain literally as a child, and the other half will regrow the connections that you lost, which would never happen as an adult. So I think catch up is a lot easier when you're younger. And as Jesse mentioned, the schools will have to be part of that catch up and not, I know they're relaxing all the standardized testing and all that, and it might have a good effect that we don't just test, but we actually connect with students and meet them where they're at. So that would not be something I would worry about if I were you, or if I just get like, as we talked about earlier on, give yourself some space in that. You do the best you can. Some of the schools are doing better than others. I don't know how you expect a 7-year-old to sit and watch a Zoom lecture all day long. And what I've heard is they bring their toys and they get up and they play around with the buttons and they do all kinds of things. So I think there'll be more catch up for the younger kids, but they're also not learning advanced calculus. So the things that they need to catch up on are pretty easy to do. So I wouldn't really worry too much about that. And someone actually asked related to that, what might the future look like at schools and how can we best prepare for those changes? Should we expect more virtual learning, smaller class sizes? I could kind of take that one on as someone very much involved in what's going on in schools. And I think probably yes to all of that. I think next year, the whole academic year is going to be some kind of a hybrid where, and I've kind of been privy to discussions at K-12 and at the university where, we can't pack students back in 30 in a small classroom. I wonder how students are going to do if they need to wear masks. I mean, they'll pull them off. They're not compliant in the way that we are. They'll just, have to eat. They have to take them off. So I think this whole academic year is going to be pretty compromised. I think it's getting better. They're not going to just say, here, have your kid watch this Zoom lecture for an hour and then figure out the rest of the day. I know at UCI, we're certainly mobilizing to do this enhanced version of remote where there's more intentional programming. Everything we did this quarter or this semester was not intentional. It was quick. It was reacting to a situation. Over the summer, we have a bit more time to be proactive and intentional and figure out really a better plan. I mean, literally, we went from everybody come to school to finals are online in a day. So you don't have time to plan. So I think that the only way to prepare now is not think things are going to go back to normal and maybe prepare your children. I don't know, Jess, if you want to add into that, prepare your children for things are going to be a little bit better, but it's going to be a slower process till they get back to normal. I don't know. Do you want to add something to that, Jessie?
I mean, I think you know more about what's likely to happen. I don't have much of insight into that, but I think, from the developmental perspective, I think now the good news is that I think that our kids will probably be so happy for any contact. Most of them will be so happy for any contact with their peers and for any contact with their teachers that now any version of normal will feel really good to them. At least the kids that I've seen who are excited to go back to school, I think they're, 2 hours in a school classroom is going to be like amazing, So, and I think they're better at doing this remote thing than they were, 2 months ago or whatever. So.
Yeah, no, I remember when for a while there was a run on vegetables and I liked broccoli and I couldn't find broccoli. And one time I went to the market and there was broccoli and I called my husband. I said, there's broccoli. I found broccoli. I'm so excited. So you're right. I think we'll be much more appreciative in a way of even smaller accomplishments. There's 2 more thematic areas I want to get to, and I see we're running out of time, and I really appreciate everybody's thoughtful questions. A couple of questions talk about just, how do you get a break from your kids? I think parents aren't used to 20, I know you can relate to that. So how, one of the questions is sometimes a parent can get really frustrated. How can we take a break from the kids in the stay-at-home environment we exist in? Another question is, let me just see if I can find it. How can I keep myself from getting upset because of too much time with kids? So what would your advice be on that?
So I think that's a really hard issue, and I don't have a great answer to that. I think it's a really big challenge because I mean, if you look at all the research literature, for answers to those questions. I mean, what I would say is the most likely answer to what's going to happen is that parents are going to burn out if they haven't already, because what happens when you have parents who have too many responsibilities, like too much work stuff and family stuff and all of it colliding, is burnout. And I can't really see how that's not going to happen if it hasn't all happened already for many people. And we can't really escape our children, right? And most people can't get babysitters, and you can't leave, and you can't go anywhere, and you can't. So, I mean, this is where I kind of am thinking, like, thinking about like a parenting values type of approach and prioritizing things. So, you know, I think like putting your kids in front of the TV and having them watch a movie buys you some time to have a glass of wine and sit by yourself and watch a movie, or do whatever, sit in your backyard, or whatever you can do to buy yourself some time, and that makes you a better parent for the next few hours. That seems like a good trade-off, you know, to me. But that might be my parenting value kind of at work. But I think that those are the kinds of things that I think are important to think about for yourself, and to think about how can you be the best parent that you want to be, and knowing yourself and knowing like what your parenting goals and values are, because we're operating in these very strange times where you can't do the things that you would normally do. You can't go out on a date with a babysitter, you can't leave the house, your kid's not in school, you can't get an escape. These are hard times. So I would say use your evening hours wisely. Don't work all the time in the evening. If you work all the time in the evening, you will never get a break from your children. You need those evening hours, and you need them more for yourself than you do for your work. That's one bit of advice. And the other bit is, I would say, use TV when you need TV, or other screen time, unless you feel like screen time is the worst thing in the entire world. But for me, I think that parents, and this is the way that I work, but I'll just tell you, I think that a parent being a parent who's yelling and scary, which is how parents can become, I think that's far worse than TV for kids.
Yeah, and I think that reflects what we talked about in the Parkside chat we filmed, is this idea of just good enough parenting really has been studied. And if ever there was a time to do just good enough parenting, this would be it. It's kind of like a $30 bottle of wine is a lot better than a $5 bottle of wine, but a $100 bottle of wine isn't all that much better than the $30. Well, maybe for some of you who are wine connoisseurs it is, but certainly for me. And so, you know, if your child watches TV for an hour or two, it's a break for you. I mean, I know sometimes I'm very health food conscious and I want my kids to eat healthy, but sometimes I just go to McDonald's because they're happy, I'm happy, and we can come home and they can do something so I can have some downtime too. And sometimes it's just small amounts of time. You don't need a lot of time. You just need, I remember sometimes, well, when my kids were a little bit older, I would just go into the bathroom and lock the door, even when I wasn't using the bathroom. And I just said, don't bug me, I'm in the bathroom. Just so I had like 5 minutes of quiet, you know, because they would sort of know to leave me alone. But it really varies by the age of your child. Well, let's kind of close with one last kind of theme and question, which is a different set of issues, which is, what is your advice to a university student who has to parent her parents? They seem to be really frightened about the pandemic, as they should be, because they are both essential workers, but their fears seem to be overcoming and overwhelming me. What are some things you recommend I should do to help minimize their fears, and probably also for this person to help them? Because I think a lot of parents also have parents that then they're responsible for, and that's a whole other stressor. They're both children and parents. So what advice would you give there, Jessie?
So this is not having to do with one's own children. This has to do with like managing one's own parents.
Yeah, being the child to
Being
the
a
parent.
parents. Okay. Yeah. That is a really great question. And I think, I mean, my answer in a way would depend on what the overall dynamic is in general with your parents. And so I don't want to give you advice that doesn't honor the nature of that relationship that you already have. Because different people have different ways of managing those relationships. But I think maybe recognizing first that that's coming from a place of love, and the desire to protect is coming from a good place. But then, you know, maybe if this feels right to you, maybe saying to them something like, I, I understand that you know, love me and want to protect me and are saying, you know, these things because you want to protect me. But I need to make my own decisions about how I'm, you know, how I'm navigating the situation or something like that. Um,
I think this is also minimizing their fears about themselves, that the parents are afraid for themselves.
mhm.
Okay? What would you tell a university student to help her parents or his parents kind of adjust to the pandemic because they're very afraid
Mhm.
for themselves?
Mhm. Wait, say more. I'm sorry, I'm not totally understanding.
So let's say your parents are
Mhm.
very frightened and your parents are essential workers, but they're really overwhelming you. You know, your parents are so afraid that you feel overwhelmed. What can you
Okay.
do, or
Okay.
what can you
They're
do for
afraid for
them?
themselves, not for the student.
Yeah, they're afraid
Okay.
for themselves.
Okay. Sorry. I misunderstood. Okay. Um, yeah. Okay. So it's the dynamic you think um, is more about the student needing some separation from the parents' own worries, not about the.
Probably,
Okay.
yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. I didn't actually see the comment, so okay. Um, yeah. Okay. That is a different dynamic. But the parents need to keep working, and the parents need to. Okay. So. Um, So it's not really about anything that I said. I think you can
No,
subscribe.
but could you
Yeah.
actually tell your parents, look, mom, or dad, or whoever, you know, you're stressing me out by constantly telling me about your fears, or let's talk about silver linings, or, you know, can we shift to maybe a more positive, you know, evening conversation or something? Because I think some people get really in a
Mhm,
spin and they spiral down and that's all they talk about. And
mhm.
so the question is, how do you get people out of that
Yeah,
framing and narrative and create another one when you're a child yourself? You know, you don't want to
yeah,
be the parent
totally,
to the parent.
totally. Yeah, I think that sounds like a good idea, and I think that you could also say something, um, if if they felt like they could say something like, you know, that when you talk about those things, that worries me a lot because I really care about you and I'm already worried about you. You know, when you're doing this type of work, then that I'm already really worried about your safety, and then you talking about this worries me more, although I'm not sure if they would feel like they could say that. But I like the positive spin type of thing, like I'm happy that you have a job, although that could feel like that's downplaying their concerns. um,
It's a tough one, huh? I
it's
know
tough.
I find, because I'm a very positive person, and so when I get around very negative people, I find I just try to find a lane so I can shift into a positive mode, you know. But that's really true. But what about what a gorgeous day it was today? Let's just feel good for a little bit and talk about what a gorgeous day it is. So you try to redirect a bit the conversation. It's a bit tricky. I mean, that's a hard one. We'll have to think about that. Let me kind of wrap up because I see we only have a couple more minutes. And what I want to, the last question, are there any reading materials or other resources you suggest? And I want to mention to everybody before we go, because I'm mindful of your time, that we're going to be sending you a follow-up email and another video around helping children deal with anxiety. We'll send you a video of this webinar as well as the video that we sent you before. But if you think a follow-up might be good, we can do Pandemic Parenting 2.0. And possibly it might be helpful for us if we get your questions beforehand, and then we can tape a Parkside chat that can really address your questions and then have a follow-up. So I'll just let you wrap up, Jessie, by suggesting other resources or materials or anything else in your repertoire of resources.
I think the Center for Traumatic Stress Network, I might be getting the name wrong. They have a really good book out for young children and explaining coronavirus. I can get that resource and we can post it on this. Um, so that's a really good resource if you're looking for something to explain to young children about this. There are actually lots of good resources out there, so that are really useful, and videos too. Some good YouTube videos that are available. But I also think that, you know, limiting media exposure in general to adult media exposure is a good strategy about this as well. And the other thing that I would just say is just remember that the best that you can do is the best that you can do. And one of the most important things is to just honor that you're doing the best that you can.
Yeah, that's really great advice to end on. I always tell people, because people say, how come you don't get stressed out with all these things and you seem to have a high stress tolerance? And I just say, hey, I know what is on me and I know what's not on me. I take responsibility for myself. I do the best I can. And as long as I did the best I can, I can't do any more. So I can't really be upset about it. I know I'm confident and happy knowing that I've done my best. And I think that's kind of the good enough parenting too.
Hmm.
You do the best you can given the circumstances. If there's 3 pieces of bread, you can't make your child a meal with vegetables and protein. You have to do the best that we can. So maybe with that, we'll kind of close on that. We're run over by a minute. I want to thank everybody so much for attending. I want to thank Dr. Borelli for her expertise and wisdom, and we will be following up with you. So I hope you all have a good day, and to embrace the positive. At least here in Southern California, it's a spectacular day out, and really go out and just take a deep breath, and we're making progress. We're doing great. So I wish you all the best, and thank you, Jessie.
Thank you. Thanks for
Bye
coming.
to everyone. Hugs, virtual hugs. Bye.